I just stared, gaping, at the mirror. There, looking back at me, was the quintessential image of a bubblegum pop culture preteen princess girly girl. Only it wasn't a girl's reflection, it was my own. I couldn't believe that my best friend Zoe had been able to so easily make me appear to be a girl. I blinked, first as an involuntary muscle reaction to some irritant to my eyes. Following that brief interruption to the still image of the youthful Lolita-like face adorned with pink lipstick and complementing near pinkish shadow and blush, I forced myself to blink a second time, then a third. Suddenly I found it hard to suppress a brief chuckle of awe-inspired amusement. I winked at the boy that I knew was staring at me, as if I were that girl I was seeing in the reflection looking across the room at jaw-dropped boy whose eyes tracked my every subtle movement. I turned my face to the side, slowly towards Zoe. I paused and made a puckering of my lips as attractive and enticing as I could muster, kissing passionately the boy deep inside who was lusting hard for this young fantasy figure that suddenly had a face. "So, do you believe me now?" Zoe asked me, grinning with a self-confident "I told you so" kind of arrogance. "Too easy, Martin. Too easy." "Wow," I said, looking at her instead of my own reflection finally. She sat on a sitting pillow atop a wooden bench with her legs folded typically back at the knee. She knew I'd stared long and dreamily hard at her legs in recent months. We were both getting older, and while she was only 12, and she was starting to take shape as a very attractive young woman. "You are more girl than you realize," Zoe said, slowly sliding her legs out from underneath her. She was graceful and fluid in an unbroken movement that reminded me of how a soft breeze would drift across my face in the spring. Ever mindful of her vulnerabilities and perceived weaknesses, she kept my eyes innocent despite the amazing short dress she'd selected to wear this afternoon. "Would you like to see more?" she asked in a teasing tone that made me wonder if she wasn't trying to set me up for something. "Uh-huh," I mindlessly droned as I turned to follow her progress across the room. She only expressed instruction for me to follow with a kind of sound, and a coy invitation with a wagging finger on a hand trailing behind her as she walked out of the room. I turned on my heels and hurried after her. In the hallway, my eyes eagerly feasted on the show she put on as she led me down the hall. She had clasped her hands together at the small of her back and she stepped in a forcefully composed manner that was accented with her shoulder and head being tossed to the extreme limit of her balance so that her ponytail danced about as it was tossed back and forth. The entire rigid-legged exercise seemed to imply a youthful carefree ignorance of any other presence, but I knew she knew full well what she was doing. There was rarely a time when Zoe wasn't in full control of at least her own actions, and quite often she was manipulating several other people at the same time. This was one of those times, the often witnessed and only occasionally a party to, when Zoe had things well under control. I didn't mind, even if I was aware of it. I doubt I would have not then anyway. She stopped at the stairs to the second floor and swung her arms out just a little as she let her hands drop, sliding playfully down her dress, so that her palms slapped on her bare thighs. The slapping pop that this created served just enough to remove me from the entranced state I was in. Again, Zoe had this orchestrated to perfection. Her hands were on her hips before I could bring my eyes to meet hers, having been delayed on her uppermost leg and hip area as her dress jumped just slightly from her hands, quickly passing over its hemline. Nothing, again, was generously put on display as to ruin neither her nor my own innocence. The look in her eyes when mine finally locked on hers, which had been apparently locked on mine for some time longer, gave me a knowing chastening while her batting eyelashes and softly upturned lips smiled at me encouragingly. "Well, Martin," she said, pausing dramatically as if what she was about to say was of great importance, "it seems to me that you want to see a lot more of this girl too." I was stunned. I didn't know whether she was trying to warn me to back off or goad me into pressing further. It took me several seconds to come up with something neutral to say. I couldn't tip my hand that both of her accusations were true. "Well, whatever you want, Zoe," I said, trying to keep from sounding nervous, and hoping that she'd find sincerity in my reply. I don't think it's my wants that matter today, she replied in a playful tone again, emphasizing my by dropping the sweet-as-honey tone she usually had, while fully implying it was entirely my desires that were paramount. But that's okay. I think it would be a lie to say I am not intrigued by this fascination you have with her. Her? I asked, as she started to go up the stairs. I followed her, eyes widening as she swung her arms widely, like a child skipping down the sidewalk, carelessly allowing me to see up her dress with little being hidden. Who do you mean? I said, coming to the top of the stairs, finding Zoe already at her bedroom door only a few feet from the staircase. Both of us, silly, she said, pulling her door shut so only her face showed through the slim opening. 1 second, I'll be right back, she said quickly before shutting the door. I heard her rustling around in her room. I had been over often enough to have seen her change before like this, in a hurried on-the-fly manner, but never had I ever heard a peep from her room in doing so. I got the impression that I'd either managed to rattle her and she was losing her cool-as-ice facade or that she was rearranging the furniture in her room. I couldn't help but think how she must be attracted to me, since I was already 13 and had to be changing like she was too, even if I couldn't see it yet myself. Zoe, are you okay? I called in at the door a few minutes later, after the flurry of activity appeared to have stopped. Yeah, 1 sec babe, she yelled back. She never called me babe before. I blushed, not knowing what that was all about. Was she starting to think of me as a boyfriend? Surely not. But then again, ever since we'd met when she'd moved in with her aunt and uncle here when she was just 9, we'd been inseparable. We'd even been allowed, as recently as 3 weeks ago, to stay the night at each other's house, in the same room all night. No one in either of our families thought anything more of our relationship than a friendship closing on near sibling affection for each other. Could it be that perhaps she was seeing me in a less sibling way like I was starting to see her? Hi, she said in a perky, speedy manner as she suddenly whipped the door open. Come in. Come in. Sorry about that, I had to clean up the room a little before I let you in. Her demeanor seemed different, more like that of the girls on the television dramas in the evening than what I was accustomed to seeing her as. So, wanna see that totally hot new dress I got this weekend that I... She paused and blushed. Oh, you already saw my baby doll dress, huh? She grinned like she'd forgotten she was just wearing it in front of me. Maybe she had. Until she said that I really hadn't noticed she changed into some small cotton shorts like the cheerleaders wore during practice in the summer and a tank top that went around her neck instead of over the shoulder and down her back. The top had the words "too cute" on it, and the shorts had princess on the butt. Both were a soft pink color with the writing in a common red. Zoe? I asked, almost laughing. Are you all right? Me? She put a hand on her chest and threw her head back with a mock surprise expression. Absolutely. But look at you. What about me? I said, looking down at my jeans and t-shirt. Nothing unusual for me. Babe, you are never going to any hunk wanting your phone number looking like that, she said, almost laughing at the very thought of it. Zoe? I was flabbergasted. Shush, she said, putting her first 2 fingers together on my lips. You did say you wanted to see her more. She winked at me. Oh, maybe you meant more of me? She had taken just a step away and looked over his shoulder at me after saying that. But if you're not interested in exploring this anymore, I am sure we can just go play some stupid video game or something. She suddenly sounded more like herself, well as I knew her, but she had a sense of disappointment and sadness in her voice. No, I hurried to change her mind. I am fine, I just wasn't prepared to see you so Bianca Logan all of a sudden. Bianca Logan was a 14-year-old girl that was every stereotype about teenaged girls rolled up into one miniskirt-wearing pigtailed touting package of pure hyperactive pep on both of our favorite TV program, Jacob's Peak. "Sorry," she said, blushing slightly. "I wondered how long I could keep all tomboy morose on you," she said, sounding candid for the first time all day. "Here." She pushed a small backpack like I'd seen many girls carrying on their way to the junior high school, where we'd be next year. "What's this?" I asked. "If you have to ask a ton of questions all the time, this won't be any fun," she chided me as she closed the distance between us. "No, go on, get. She was pushing me towards the other side of her room. "Get where?" I asked. She pointed to the closet where a changing screen was pulled out. "There." She shook her head and gave me that dull look. "Hurry up, and just take off everything that I've supplied the equivalent for." I tried to start to ask her a question. "And don't ask, just do it before you go thinking like a little boy and ruin this for us both." Clearly she wasn't going to let me ask anything. "Hey, these might not." I started to protest about the clothing in the bag, but she cut me off. "Half of that in there is lycra, it'll fit fine. The rest we'll just make do with. You're not that far off my size." She offered up without compassion for what she'd given me. "Oh Marty, be a doll and hand over those icky boys' rags you have on first." I took the clothes out of the bag. A small t-shirt that I doubted would be too much trouble to fit into even with the sleeves practically non-existent, a skirt that was thankfully a bit longer than Zoe's dress was earlier, a pair of long really thin socks, a training bra and panties that were both white with a pink bow in the center of each. There were even shoes at the bottom of the bag. "You want me to wear all of this?" I asked. "Well, you do." She emphatically stressed due to me, "Want to do this right, don't you, Marty?" "I guess so," I said, almost unsure if I really wanted to do it at all. Then she said something under her breath about needing help getting into her ballet dress, and I lost all will to not do this. "Then again, anything worth doing, right?" I said, trying to sound more spirited. "That's the spirit," she said happily. She turned on some pop music a second after. I took off my shirt and jeans, and sat down on the bench and to get my socks off. When all of those were off, I looked in the mirror and saw nothing of the maturity I saw in other boys my age, and hoped that it was only because I'd just turned 13 a month ago and not some slow onset of puberty or worse, a failure for it to come at all. While I stood there, I could hear Zoe pacing on the other side of the screen, waiting on me obviously. It took all the gusto I could muster, but finally I got back to task. Nervously, I stepped out of my underwear and pushed them into a pocket of my jeans. I didn't want Zoe to see them even with all of this going on. "Here." I handed the bag out to her with all my clothing in it. "I'm gonna get this other stuff on now," I said, before she could speak so she'd know not to come around yet. "Okay." She took the bag. "But don't keep me waiting too long. Girls can't play fashionably late when they don't have to decide what to wear." She had that playful tone again. I heard her hopping about, moving to other side of the room and starting to sing along with the radio. A moment later she reached her arm around, holding a glass of Kool-Aid for me. "Here you go," she said cheerfully. "I thought you might like something to drink." I thanked her. I was thirsty and downed most of it before I sat it down on the floor beside the tall stool. It felt wonderful to have had something to drink just then. I hoped it'd give me some strength as I looked at the girl's clothing awaiting me. I took a deep breath as I picked up the panties, a finger and thumb to each side as if I was going to break them by holding them any other way. Slowly, I stepped into them and began to slide them up my legs. They were very soft, and by the time I got to my knees I was fully erect, and discouragingly a rather sad display to boot, when I finally remembered to breathe. I let out a long, hard gasp of air as I jerked the panties up the rest of the way. I looked in the mirror at how they hugged my unshaped butt and how the modestly angled cut actually made me appear to have some sense of a bikini line and just a smidge of hips shaping out. I took the little bra next and undid the clasp. Putting an arm through each shoulder strap was much faster done than was stepping into the panties. Thankfully the bra clasped in front so I could see what I was doing by pulling it out a little and looking as close to my chest as I could manage. I took the shirt next, a small soft pink t-shirt with almost no sleeves. I pulled it down over my head and slid my arms in, just like a normal shirt I found out. I had no idea why I thought it would be different. It hugged my body, almost all over. Right near the end, about where my ribs ended, it felt loose and I could see it hang and move a little as I leaned or turned. I felt the soft fabric rubbing my skin and couldn't help but wonder why girls' shirts were so much softer than boys' since this was cotton just like my own shirt had been. I shrugged, feeling it pull up a little, and that loose area snugly grip what had been snug with the area just above it a moment before. I ignored it for now. I had to get the skirt on before Zoe got impatient and came around the screen to see me. Finally, I pulled it up in front of me. The skirt was pink denim, pleated much like a cheerleader's uniform skirt. Actually, if not for being denim, it probably could have been a pink uniform skirt. I unzipped the tiny zipper on the side and slid the hook-in eye clasp at the zipper's top and carefully stepped into it. I pulled it up much quicker than the panties over these same trembling legs, but only because it didn't start to pull or get snug on anything until it was almost all the way up to my waist. I pulled the zipper up carefully and took in a breath, pulling my stomach in a little to get the hook clasp secured. Then I turned and looked at the mirror again. I was scared pale. The skirt was just as short, if not shorter than Zoe's dangerously displayed dress. I panicked and wondered what to do. I was looking around for my pants when I'd remembered I'd already given them to Zoe. What could I do now? I couldn't wear this. I'd be flashing my panties, no my butt in her panties, to anyone. Then a new fear hit me. Who else was she planning on having over, or worse, was she planning on forcing me to go outside with her somewhere dressed like this? I was a wreck. Terror racked my brain and I started to get confused, and that made me more scared. Suddenly things started to get fuzzy, the music seemed to get quiet and sounds seemed to silence themselves. I felt like I was falling, maybe flying. It didn't matter, I was not right. Suddenly I felt something warm on my shoulder, then my hip. It was a hand, someone was holding me. I leaned my head back and felt it come to rest on a shoulder. Cascades of light brown hair rained down onto and around my face, and hidden beneath these I began to finally feel safe from my terrors. "Baby, you have this all wrong." I vaguely remember hearing Zoe speak to me. "This is way too high, let me fix this." I felt her tugging the skirt to and fro, mostly downward, and some minor pulling on my shirt and pushing my chest and more adjusting. She had me sit down and I felt the air chill as something enveloped my leg from the foot all the way to the base of my knee, then the other leg. A moment later my foot was trapped, tightly secured in a firm-based compartment. I don't know how long I was out of it, but it had to be for more than just a few minutes. I started to come around and found myself laying on the couch in the den of my house. I recognized the desk, Dad's dear head on the wall that Mom wouldn't let him put anywhere else. The lights were dimmed so my eyes didn't ache, but my head was throbbing. I sat up and grabbed my head. I felt something odd, soft but thin and paper-like. I stood up, and when I did I almost fell down. My balance was all wrong, and the rush of cool air on my legs. I looked down and almost fainted. I was really wearing the tiny pink denim skirt and the tight little shirt, which had a modest breast contour poking out from underneath it. I stumbled trying to get to the mirror on the wall. The shirt was short, leaving my tummy exposed almost entirely from the end of ribs to the just above the widest point on my hips where the skirt rested. Finally, I'd realized that the shoes I was wearing had a heel on them. I lifted a leg, bracing myself against an end table for support, and looked at the shoe. It had to be a 2 or 2.5 inch heel, easily. At least it wasn't a spike heel or something similar. These looked like pink schoolgirl shoes. The white socks that came up to my knees had a thin red ribbon weaving in and out around the top band that ended in a bow on the outside of my leg, a pink plastic heart charm in the middle of it all. I looked at my hands, pink fingernail polish and longer nails. I didn't remember putting fake nails on. I managed to walk to the mirror by making really small steps that forced me to turn my legs awkwardly. I was sure I looked like someone was pulling a massive wedgie on me by the way I was walking. It occurred to me halfway to the mirror that I must be experiencing a wiggle or hip toss thing like girls do, but without the hips for it I had to look awkward and almost goofy like a lot of young girls still not quite developing into the clothing sizes they grew into. It pained me to think of that I was mincing around like a scared and awkwardly unprepared schoolgirl. Finally, I reached the mirror. I had pigtails, 2 of them high on the back of my head that pushed long tails up before letting them arc downward towards my back. I shook my head and felt them tickle my upper mid-back. My long hair had been a curse in this whole thing, I thought. The paper-feeling stuff, 2 pink ribbons tied into bows at the top of the pigtails, and several smaller pink and white and red streaming ribbons twisting throughout the tails themselves. My face had the same pink lipstick and eyeshadow and blush as before, but my cheeks sparkled with girlish glitter too. I looked like a typical tween girl trying to be a cute little girl and an attractive young woman at the same time. I stepped back and took a moment to read the shirt, barely making the curvy elongated script in the reverse in the mirror. Daddy's Little Princess, it read. I took the mirror off the wall and laid it on the floor. Squatting, I pulled the skirt pleats up and looked at the mirror's reflection of my butt. Pink panties, not the white I remembered putting on, with darker writing that said, angelic. I hardly felt angelic at the moment. Suddenly I heard a thud. Zoe! I said in a half-whisper, half-talk, almost loud voice. My voice was off, sounding slightly higher than usual. I shrugged that off. It had to be the sleep wearing off still. My voice hadn't broken yet and it did all sorts of weird things when I woke up. I stayed put, figuring being low couldn't hurt. I was wrong, it was going to hurt no matter what. Suddenly the lights got bright and I squinted in pain from the sudden change to my eyes. I had been watching the doorway to the house and saw no one come in. But hearing Mom and Dad's voices behind me, I knew that they'd come in from the garage. What? Who the hell? Dad said, standing somewhere behind me. I could only imagine his shock, seeing a young girl squatting over a mirror that had been on the wall holding her. I dropped the front of my skirt, not even realizing that the mirror would be betraying any modesty anyway and that it was a useless action since they were indeed behind me. Oh my! Mom said a second later. Robert, don't say. Mom tried to stop Dad, but it was too late. Stand up, sweetie, and for modesty's sake, please step away from the mirror on the floor. He said gently and calmly. I stood slowly and took 2 steps forward, away from them. Turn around, sweetheart, are you one of Martin's friends? He asked me. I shook my head no, feeling the pigtails bounce on my back and shoulders. I winced, realizing I'd screwed up again. If I wasn't their only child's friend, what was I doing in their house? Dad didn't miss this miscue either. Then what are you doing in our house, and how did you get in? He said, as I heard him taking a step forward, sounding slightly more inquisitive and commanding. Panic set in and I knew I couldn't let Dad see me like this. I had to get out of the house fast. Before he could close within arm's reach of me, I burst towards the other door. It was hard to run, since I was taking tiny, almost mincing steps in these shoes, as the shoes lacked real grip and left me sliding and skidding a lot. I almost collided with a bookcase and a wall before I got situated directly at the doorway. I was almost there. I could hear Dad closing behind me as I reached out, hoping to grab the doorway to slingshot myself around the corner into the hallway towards the front door. Just before I made it to the door, however, Mom stepped in the way. I locked my legs as best I could to stop, but it was useless. I slid into her, leaning backwards and looking downward, trying to stop and not look at her at the same time. Both failed. I crashed into Mom and fell flat on my butt, and momentum took my head back to the floor. I laid there dazed from the sudden impact, with Mom staring down at me astonished. She'd recognized me right away. As I started to pass out, I heard Dad asking Mom what was the matter, asking about blood. "No, Robert," Mom said. "Our son is not bleeding," she said as I slowly closed my eyes, slipping off into my second unconsciousness for the day. I had no idea what I'd find, or even that I'd be going unconsciousness to awake to something the first time. This time, I knew I'd awaken to a confused and bewildered parents, and quite possibly an angry father that cherished manliness and that was violently homophobic. The light hurt my eyes. It was so bright and must have been shining on me directly. I squinted my tearing eyes and blinked several times, trying to get them to focus. Finally, I was starting to see things. I was in the living room at my house. At first, I couldn't remember what had happened. Everything was such a blur. But when I reached up to brush my long bangs off my face, it came crashing back to me. My hands had pink fingernail polish on them, and my bangs. I tugged on them a little. They had been curled some, and they had pink highlights streaked in them. I patted my head gently, running my fingers up to the top of the crown. My hair was tight and bound back. I finally reached the 2 high pigtails adorned with a large ribbon on each. I knew I couldn't let Mom and Dad find me. Too late. The thought of Mom and Dad was enough to jog my memory. Mom and Dad had come home just after I'd woken up in the den. Before I could get over the little girl I appeared to be dressed as they had walked in on me. I had been so enraptured by the sight of my panties in the mirror I'd laid on the floor that I wasn't paying attention. My panties? I thought to myself. You are losing it, Martin. I chided myself. Zoe. I said her name, silently, like a swear word. Zoe had set me up. What was it that she slipped in my Kool-Aid that made me black out? And why did she bring me home dressed like some frilly sissy girl? I wanted answers, now. I sat up, suddenly aware of the stiffness in my body, and the sharp stabbing pain sitting up caused. I groaned in response to the pain before I could stop to think about being quiet. "Oh, you're awake, sweetheart?" My mother's voice came from somewhere behind me. "Mama?" I asked, sounding scared. "Yes, dear, I am here," she said with the classic motherly soothing tone. "Your father is out right now, so just take it easy." "But Mama..." I was scared and found myself wishing she wasn't in the room. I knew my tone had conveyed as much, betraying my wishes to hide my feelings at the moment. "I've had a look at you already, while you were asleep there." Mama started to reply, and I must say, you did go all out on this, didn't you? "Zoe," I began to explain, but something gave me pause. "Zoe helped you?" Mama interjected when I'd paused. "How sweet of her. She is the one that..." I began to blurt out. "Wait, sweet?" I asked, shaking my head sharply in very short jerks. "What do you mean, sweet of her?" I inquired. "It was nice of her to help you do it right, Mama answered plainly. She, by now, was coming around the side of the couch and had just sat down next to me. It isn't easy to tie such a pretty bow in the back of a dress like this. Mama said, running her hands along the hem of my dress, ruffling the multi-layered petticoat that made the skirt stand outward more than hang downward. "But Mama," I slowly forced the words to come to my lips as her hand gently brushed my knees, still encased in the tight material that the tall stockings were made from. "Aren't you angry or mad at me?" "For what, dear?" She looked me square in the face and asked me so straightforward I couldn't help but feel ashamed of myself. She must have seen the sinking feeling I was experiencing in my face because I didn't have time to truly turn away when she gently braced my chin on her other hand and kept my head held up so that I was looking directly at her. "Don't be afraid of me," she said softly. "And I don't hate you for this." She sighed, not the kind of resignation sigh that signaled defeat or that one was giving up. This was more of a patience and thought-gathering sigh that had me hanging on the fringes of each passing second waiting for her to speak again. It may have felt like a long time, but it couldn't have been more than a few seconds that passed before she continued. "I think you look adorable. And to discover that you went through all this trouble to explore your thoughts and self-image like this is a wonderfully brave thing. I am glad to see that you have this kind of confidence to do something like this, especially with the girl you've had a crush on for years helping you." "Mama!" I gasped in surprise. "How did you know I liked Zoe?" I blurted out before I realized I'd admitted something that I'd been denying to everyone, even myself, for so long. "I mean," I stammered, trying to convince myself I could deny it still, but in the end I gave up. I sighed, one of those resignation types Mama didn't use before speaking again. "I do like her," I said meekly. "And this was her doing, her idea." I paused, not mine. "Really?" Mama asked me. I looked back up at her, having turned my eyes away only a split second after admitting my lack of originality and control in my appearance at the moment. Her face and speech was full of surprise. "Yes," I said, reaffirming what I'd just admitted. "Why are you so surprised?" I asked. "What, you think I secretly wanted to be a helpless sissy girl?" I was hurt and shocked to find Mama would even think for a moment that I'd been a willing participant, much less the originator of such an idea as this, to dress up as a little sissy girl. "No, not that," she said, shaking her head, her expression showing she was deep in thought. "And, for the record, being a girl doesn't make you a sissy or helpless," she said with a hint of defiance and pride. I didn't mean, I thought a second about how to explain what I'd really meant, but failed to come up with anything, and let my explanation fall short of saying anything. Mama seemed content to let me off the hook. "So did Zoe think up this cute dress-up game then?" she asked. "Sort of." I really didn't want to have to explain how things went down. I didn't really know how everything happened. One minute Zoe was being typical Zoe, next minute she is being flirty in a tease by showing off her panties, going upstairs and playfully asking me to follow her. A few moments later I am drinking Kool-Aid that had to be laced with her narcolepsy medication or something because it made me black out. And then I woke up just before she and Dad walked in on me. How would I explain this? "What do you mean?" She wanted to know the details, as I'd feared. Well, I hesitated, but her glare told me to just spill it, so I did. Zoe invited me over to play her new PlayStation game, as you know, and I went over just after lunch. I let the details slip a little but didn't tell her everything. We played for an hour or so and then she started to act silly. She was all, "Do you remember how we'd play house and dress up as kids, and what not?" Then she got all flirty with me. I tried to convey as best I could manage how I was innocent in all this, describing myself as a hapless and helpless victim, but I could see Mama wasn't buying it entirely. By the time I'd gotten to the part where I started to undress in Zoe's room, she stopped me. "Wait a minute," Mama interrupted my storytelling. "You mean to tell me that she orchestrated all this and you just went along without protesting?" I didn't know what else to do. "Oh, please." Mama rolled her eyes. "You were hoping she'd get all turned on and you'd get to kiss her, weren't you?" She read me like an open book. "Mama!" I said in exasperation. Hey, I was a teenager once too, remember? She said in defense of her accusation. But go on. I did as she told, and told her the rest, as best I could remember. I don't know what happened after that, I finished, recalling the sudden dizziness and sleepiness I'd felt after taking a few sips of that Kool-Aid Zoe'd given me. So you don't remember cleaning up your room or redecorating? Mama asked me. Redecorating? I repeated, questioning her in return. Yes, your room. She rolled her hands over one another as she spoke as if the motion would jog my memory somehow. What do you mean? I asked, getting to my feet. I winced as the sudden jump to my feet made my head hurt. You have all these boy band posters up and the pink chair rail you'd had covered up is uncovered, she said, standing herself, in explanation. Boy band posters? The idea was every bit as disgusting to me as I'd sounded in reply. Mama grabbed my arm, bracing me a little as I sped around the corner and reached the stairs on my way to my room. I had to see what she was talking about, and I wasn't wasting any time for trivial matters such as balance and footing as I half ran. Easy there, sweetie, Mama said as I pulled away, extending my stride to pull myself up 2 steps at a time. As I reached the top of the stairs, I tried to pivot on my heel and send myself in expeditious manner around the half wall that separated the floor from the opening for the staircase. I lost my footing for the 100th time and fell. I wound up doing a near splits as my trailing leg stepped up off the toes and the leading leg suddenly slipped out from under me at the heel. My groin crashed clumsily into the corner made by the floor and the top of the last step, and only my grip in the banister kept me from falling over backwards and tumbling down the stairs into my mother, who was in chase behind me. Mama grabbed me about my hips and helped me get back erect as she came up the stairs. I told you to take it easy, she scolded me in a passive I told you so tone. Little girls' dress shoes aren't as gripping as tennis shoes. Mama kept a firm grip on my hand as I walked to my bedroom. When the door opened, I was glad she had kept me in her cautious hold all the way down the hall. The bubblegum pink chair rail was once again uncovered and seemed more prominent than the way I'd left the room this morning. Covering the wall space above my bed, and most of the clean space I'd had the room dominated with before, was taken up with pictures and posters from teen magazines of the latest heartthrob boy band singers. Even the ceiling was plastered with teen boys' pictures. What happened in here? I asked, more rhetorically than inquisitively. I assumed you'd know, Mama answered. My clothes? I said in disbelief as my attention turned to the open closet, which was full of pastel-colored dresses. Yep, all pretty dresses and skirts and what have you, Mama said calmly. Mama? I was panicked. I couldn't remember anything about this. Nothing came to mind, and I tried to remember what had happened at Zoe's. As far as I knew, the incident there was limited to just this one outfit, and until I realized where I was when I woke up, I wouldn't have dared to think it possible that I'd have walked home in anything but my own clothing. Relax, Mama said authoritatively. I'm going to call Zoe's mother and see if she knows anything about this. This is way beyond joking. She ran her fingers through my pigtails as she spoke, having an amazingly calming effect on me. Mama escorted me to her bedroom and had me sit on the end of her bed. It was a tall frame bed and I couldn't quite touch my feet to the floor from where I sat. I always hated that about Mama and Dad's bed, but I hated it even more now. Given the little girl appearance of my clothing and hairstyle, I felt even more diminutive than usual. Pamela, Mama spoke into the phone, it's Karen. How are you this evening? She paused a little while. Great, I am glad to hear it. Hey, did you see what Zoe and Martin were up to this morning? Really? They did. And he did what? Mama's conversation was starting to worry me. Well, he was in the most immodest position when Robert and I came home this afternoon and caught him staring up his own dress squatting over a mirror. He claims that Zoe did this to him, against his will. Mama muttered a few and aha responses for a short while before finally deciding we needed to go over there. Would you mind terribly if I brought Martin over and us two ladies sit these two down and sort this out? Great, we'll be right over. Thanks, Pam. Mama hung the phone up and turned to look at me. She had an odd smile on her face. Well, sweetie, we're going to get to the bottom of this. She paused, taking my hand to escort me out of the room. Any idea why Zoe would tell her mother that this was your idea? She asked me as I got my feet securely under me after sliding off the bed. No, Mama, I swear it was her idea. I pleaded. It's okay if you really did want to do this. Let that kind of trail off as if baiting me to claim credit for this. I didn't want to do this, I promise. I said emphatically. Okay, relax, she said with enough forcefulness to stop my protesting tone. I was just saying that if, her tone on if was accusatory and probative at the same time, that your father and I would be okay with it. Humph. I doubt that, Mama, I said with disdain. I don't think Daddy would be nearly as forgiving or understanding as you are. Daddy? Questioned my childlike affectionate term for my father. Are you sure this isn't something you wanted? She pressed me once more, as we reached the front door. Yes. I said, failing to hide the irritation I was feeling over being asked yet again about my desires in this matter. I don't want to be a stupid girl. I snapped. Just because you're dressed like a princess doesn't mean you get to cop an attitude with me, young lady. My mother snapped back, putting the strength of her speech on the end of her reply, fully letting the bite of being called a girl sink in on me. Sorry, I said meekly. Let's go, she said coldly, opening the door. My heart sank as the door opened. Right there, just about to press the doorbell button, was my best friend Randy Carlisle. Hello, Randy. Smiled, greeting my friend. What brings you by this evening? Hello, Miss Stevens. Randy smiled back at my mother, but just momentarily, shifting his eyes off from me just long enough to respectfully acknowledge and reply to her. And hello, beautiful, he said, grinning widely at me. Surely he could tell who I was. He couldn't be that engrossed in the short lace-trimmed dress to fail to recognize his own best friend. Cut the crap, Randy, I said, not trying to hide my identity. Martin. Randy gasped in shock. Is that? He paused. Oh my God. I am so sorry. He was stuttering and stammering. Wow. Now you really do look like a girl. Now? Asked, pushing me out the door and shutting it behind us. I felt suddenly exposed and on display when I heard the door shut behind me. The gentle breeze that tickled its way across my mid-thigh was enough to make me feel dangerously vulnerable and self-conscious. Shut up! I glared sharply at my friend, rolling my eyes upward to look him in the face as I tilted my face downward slightly. I stomped my foot for effect, but in the dress and with the small heel preventing my entire foot from crashing down at once, I didn't get very much into it and it sounded pathetically small and weak, at least I thought so. No, don't, Mama said. Please, Randy, tell me this story. I am just dying to hear it. She shot me a not another word look that kept me silent, shamefully so. Well, Randy looked at me, all but ensuring I'd turn my face away from him, which I did, as if he were to find permission or lack thereof to speak. After a delay he realized that there was no help from me, and much to my dismay he continued. Remember when Martin stayed the night at my house last fall? He started. Martin and you stay over at each other's a lot, Mama said plainly. Can you be a little more enlightening as to which time this was? Her casual sarcasm was meant as a jest, and the wry grin Randy flashed back showed he had picked up on that and would be less likely to hold anything back. Mama had disarmed his apprehensions skillfully. Randy chuckled. Yes, ma'am. It was the same Katrina had her sleepover for her birthday. Katrina is Randy's little sister. She turned 10 last fall and had a bunch of her friends over for a slumber party following the general birthday celebration with boys and girls. To keep Randy from being a pain in Katrina's party, their mother agreed to let him have someone stay the night, if for no other reason than to keep him occupied. For a good while it had worked, until the girls came into the upstairs game room looking for the boys. Your mom wanted 2 almost teenaged boys around with all those little girls? Mama asked. Sounds like a recipe for disaster to me. You didn't tease those precious angels, did you? Angels, my awe. I caught myself from slipping and swearing in front of my mother, but just barely. Achoo! I tried to sell a fake sneeze. Angels. Whatever. I said bitterly. Yeah, well, they weren't exactly angels to us, Randy added. What could they do to you too? Mama asked, with a grin and a tone of disbelief. A lot, I said dryly. They are demon spawn, all of them. Martin, my mother chastised me. Well, he would be the one to complain after what we went through, Randy defended me. The girls came up into the game room asking for help getting something down from the closet. So, being the nice brother and friend that we are, we went downstairs with them. They wanted us to help them get down some old board game that was on the top shelf. It was way up there, I don't know how they even saw it. I had to use a step stool to get up there and even then could barely reach it. Mama just nodded occasionally as Randy got into the story. Well, next thing you know, they're asking us to move the table apart to put in the extenders. Randy continued, so all of them could play. This is where the problems started. Martin and I couldn't get the table to separate. So? Mama asked. We worked at it for a while, double-checked the levers that locked it together and finally gave up telling the girls it was stuck, Randy said with a defeated tone. That's when the teasing started. Don't tell me you're all broken up over some grade school girls teasing you for not being able to pull apart a stuck table. Mama scoffed, eyeing me sternly. No, Randy said. They made a dare, a bet of sorts, with us though. Katrina and her best friend Cindy bet that they could get the table apart, and if they did, we'd have to be their models for their makeover and dress-up games that night, all night. And you're going to tell me that a dozen little girls pulled this giant table apart? Mama said, joking. Not only did they do it, but they pushed it back together and made us try again, as a further bet to redeem ourselves, or else be made to be a girl with them for the night. Randy said with a lot more animation in his expressions and tones than he usually spoke with. And you took this second wager? Mama asked, using a tone that suggested we would be stupid or crazy to say yes. Which is what we did say, we had to, it had been done already. Maybe her tone was properly addressing our state of mind. Clearly we were stupid to accept their terms to any degree, much less these extended agreements we'd conceded to. We did, Mama, I said softly, almost mumbling. Don't mumble, dear, my mother said. And pick your head up. Nobody likes a gloomy Gus, and you're too pretty looking to walk around moping like that. Mama! Gasping, I snapped at her. That's better, she said, ignoring my anger, pleased that I had looked up. I knew better than to let my head dip down again so soon, so I made the conscious effort to keep my face up for everyone to see me, however humiliating it was. So we said sure, whatever, Randy continued as if the whole interruption of my mother and I speaking wasn't happening. And lo and behold, that stupid table was stuck again. You're kidding, Mama said. How did they move it? Well, we found out later that there was a trick to it, Randy answered. And we just didn't know how to pull properly on one end before the other. Knowing how to do it made the table easily separated by even 2 or 3 of my sister's friends, much less the entire group. So they made you dress up? Mama asked, snickering. Sounds like this isn't your first time in pretty skirts. Mama looked at me with one of those I knew it grins. Yep, Randy said. They pushed us into different rooms and made us beg them for real clothes to wear, having us say how pathetic and worthless we were as boys and all that crap. Basically, they wanted us to beg them to let us pretend to be better humans and to give us girls' clothing to wear and let us pretend to be girls, he scoffed. As if that made us something better, just because we'd be in skirts. Randy, please, I begged him not to go into any details. Hush, princess, my mother shushed me. As I stared agape at Mama, Randy kept on spilling his guts. I got lucky. Katrina gave me a pair of pink shorts with white lace trim on the end of the legs to wear. Well, those with the leggings and a Princess Cinderella t-shirt. You call that lucky? Mama asked, obviously begging for the details of what was unlucky. Yeah, compared to what Marty was given. Randy laughed. But even that was nothing compared to what he put on. Oh, really? Mama asked, turning her attention back to me with an inquisitive stare. Yeah. Randy looked at me and stopped laughing when he saw the anger in my face. Cindy pushed him into Katrina's room and told him to put on the outfit on Katrina's bed. Well, genius here doesn't put on the basic sundress. No, he puts on the leotard and tutu skirt and fairy wings of Katrina's Halloween costume. He laughed heartily. Shut up. I snapped at Randy. Marty. Mama scolded me. Hey, you're the one that pranced around all night in what, 4 different girly outfits? Randy teased me. 4? Mama asked me, obviously stunned. Don't remind me, I said to Randy, but he kept on talking. I doubt you'll ever forget those cute little things. He started to lose it, laughing very hard as we walked, almost losing his footing a few times. Especially the lace-trimmed panties. Panties? Mama stared at me, her eyes wide open as her mouth. Why in the world did you? Panties? She stammered out her questions so accusatory that I knew I had to come up with some sort of explanation. Yes, I meekly said, wishing I could just run away. I doubted I would have been able to, even if I tried, given these shoes I had on. The girls said I would be better behaved as a young lady if I wore them. I didn't have a choice, Mama, honest. You did so. Randy interjected. They asked me to wear them, but I said no. You did it because you wanted to get a kiss from Emily. Emily was the only girl close to our age, being a year younger than me. She was there as something of a chaperone to assist Randy's mom with the daunting task of looking after so many little girls and 2 mischievous boys. You wore panties trimmed with lace like a little princess to get a girl to kiss you? Mama asked. Well, they wanted me to wear them. I started to defend myself, and that was the second pair I put on, because Emily offered to kiss me if I did. Second pair? Mama stopped, grabbing my arm gently, but firmly enough to stop me. Marty, I want you to level with me right now. Her tone had grown deadly serious. Are you afraid of telling your father and I that you really like these girls' clothes? It's okay, I mean it, if you do. I just don't want to get to Zoe's house to find that you lied to me, because if we do get there and that's what I find out, you're a little mini-skirted and panty-clad but will be grounded for a very long time. And you'll be forced to wear the sissiest stuff I can get you into. I promise you. Her glare was stern and let me know she meant what she threatened. Mama, I don't remember what happened with Zoe, I said softly. I had to repeat it when she demanded it, not hearing the first time. And I don't think I want to be a sissy princess. Watch your mouth. Mama snapped at me. But Mama. And just because you like dresses and skirts doesn't make you gay, Mama said. Well, it'd seem pretty gay to me, Randy said bluntly. Randy, Mama replied before I could, do you think that your mother would like to hear you making such mean remarks to your best friend? Because I bet she wouldn't, and I am pretty sure I could get her to put you in a skirt to make you be nice if I told her what you were doing. Mama's stern tone and rigid face gave me a warm feeling, like a blanket of safety had been wrapped around my shoulders. No, ma'am, Randy replied with a docile tone. She wouldn't like it. I'm sorry, Marty. He said the apology after a short pause, but I could tell he meant it. It's okay. I looked at him trying not to grin and seem like a coy girl, even if I felt oddly playful about my situation suddenly. I knew you didn't mean it, you're a sweetheart. A what? Randy said, looking shocked. I meant a good friend. I blurted out. Enough, you two. Mama stopped us. We're almost to Zoe's house, why don't you two walk in front of me and talk? I need to think about how to talk to Zoe's mother about all this, she said, letting herself fall behind our pace, despite my tiny steps. My stride was short enough that I was stepping 2, almost 3, times to ease one step Randy made, making me almost skip to keep up with him. More than once he looked at me funny, and more than once I found myself clinging with both arms to one of his to keep from falling. Finally we settled into a slow pace, as he choked his stride back to suit mine, with me occasionally taking his hand to prevent me from falling. We didn't talk much like Mama wanted. I felt humiliated, and the few whispered remarks Randy sent my way were sympathetic and often apologetic. I didn't know why he'd apologize to me, but his sincerity did make me feel better, so I didn't protest it too much. Do you want me to stay with you? Randy asked as we got to Zoe's front yard. No, I'll be okay, I said. Actually, this is going to be bad enough as it is, I added after a short pause. Think I could persuade you to take off and let me just fill you in later? Sure thing, cutie, Randy replied with a wicked grin. He knew that would grate on me like sandpaper, and I knew he knew it too. Sorry, he said with a more disarming smile. I couldn't help myself. He chuckled only slightly, seeing my obvious discomfort. Call me later, okay? I will. Goodbye, Miss Stevens, Randy said politely to my mother as he turned to go. Leaving already? Mama asked. Yeah, Marty seems shy about all this, and I think I am making this harder on him, he said, adding something afterwards that I couldn't quite hear. He's a good boy, Mama said, coming up to me after her brief exchange I failed to catch. Yeah, Randy's a good buddy, I said, trying to take away the cute good boy, cute innocent girl impression I felt Mama was saying that with. You know what I mean, she said with an admonishing downcast stare that pierced through me. So do you, I said plainly. Let's get this straight. I started to speak with force and conviction, for the first time since I'd woken up in front of Mama dressed like this, when the door suddenly opened. Zoe stood there wearing a short jumper that was styled like overalls but cut to be a mid-thigh dress rather than pants or shorts. She wore no tights or socks, just slip-on shoes with a flower on the top front of each, a flower that matched the ones on her ponytail rubber band. Hi, Marty, she said gleefully to me. Oh, hi, Mrs. Stevens, she added, seeing my mom next to me. Please come in. We're just about ready for tea and cookies. Would you two ladies like some? She asked. I winced at her addressing me as a lady and couldn't bring myself to say yes or no. I would love to, Mama said, and so would Marty, but Zoe, dear, she added without missing a step, Marty isn't a lady. Mama was sticking up for me at least. Zoe giggled a second. Well, he looks like one, and he did say that he wanted to be just like me. She did a twirl, her dress barely moving due to how it was cut almost straight at the hem. And I am a lady, so wouldn't that make him a lady right now dressed up all pretty like me? She struck a cute pose, bending at the waist a little with her hands clasped together behind her right at the small of her back. She blinked her eyes with a coy grin that almost had me answering her with a yes before I thought about it. Zoe, Mama started again, let's keep all this cutesy stuff a no-go for right now. Marty's all confused by all this and says you did this to him. Mama urged her to walk on and she did so. Ah, Pamela, Mama greeted Zoe's mother who was sitting at the table when we entered the room. She got up and her and Mama hugged. Good to see you again. We really need to get out more often like we used to. Surely, Pamela replied. It has been over a month now? Easily, Mama answered warmly, smiling through the idle chit-chat that followed. Finally, after a few moments of greetings and remembrances of past shopping exploits, they found themselves coming back to the matter at hand. I had been standing there awkwardly feeling out of place when Zoe's mother addressed us too. Zoe, Marty. She got our attention with the sing-song tone of voice she'd called our names with. Please be good lasses and fetch the tea and cookies from the kitchen. Lass? I exclaimed. Sorry, Marty, dear, Zoe's mother said, sounding sincere. A slip of the tongue. But given your current state of dress, can you at least find it reasonable for my error? She sounded like she was teasing me, while genuinely apologizing at the same time. I didn't know how to take the question, but the stare Mama was shooting my way said to be nice, which I decided was the best course of action anyway. It's okay, I said sorrowfully. I suppose if Zoe was wearing boys' undies and my clothes and someone called her a boy it'd be an honest mistake too. I didn't believe that it would happen that way. Zoe had worn boys' clothing before, what girl hadn't? But then again, girls weren't made to feel bad about themselves for doing so why wouldn't they? I sighed and turned to follow Zoe into the kitchen. He's wearing panties? I heard Zoe's mother almost whisper her surprise to Mama. Zoe! I half scolded in a whisper as best I could manage. What did you do to me? Nothing you didn't say you didn't want, she said plainly, her back to me. Nothing I didn't want? I was aghast. How could she think I wanted to be dressed up like a fairy sissy girl? I never said I wanted to be a sissy girl. You didn't, no, Zoe said plainly, turning around to find me practically right up against her. I could tell, for the first time, that she was wearing a training bra and had a gentle form about her chest I'd only dreamed of before. Somehow her proximity and leaned-back posture seemed to disarm me. She looked almost scared and weak, yet she was in control here. She had done this to me. But you did say you wondered what it liked to feel like a girl. What? I stammered out, I had no recollection of saying that. She leaned forward, straightening herself up, so that we almost touched chest to chest. I felt my dress push up slightly in the back as the heavily petticoat form was compressed in front against her less frilly denim jumper. You said you wanted to know what it felt like to be a girl and be all cute like a girl. So I tried to help you. I don't remember saying that, I said, still whispering. You did, I taped it on my video camera. You have a video camera? I was surprised to hear this. I didn't know why. Zoe's parents were well off and she had practically everything she ever wanted. She did chores and odd jobs around the house for most of it, so she wasn't as spoiled as one would expect, but it was a known fact around the neighborhood Zoe didn't want for anything for very long, ever. Besides, I think you're cute, Zoe added, ignoring my inquiry. Cute? I was surprised. How could any girl see a boy in panties and frilly dresses as cute? What was I to her, a living doll? Yes, she said, as she leaned in and kissed my cheek softly. You are very cute, in that way. She whispered so softly in my ear I barely heard the words. As she tried to slip past me, I stepped into her, pressing her lower back into the counter to pin her there. She started to ask why or what, or something, and when she did I kissed her, on the lips. It was a kiss that she returned. Well, I guess we know what prompted this little charade. Mama's voice behind us startled both Zoe and I, and we jumped apart. Both of us were blushing deeply. Ah, how cute, Pamela said. Our little ones are exploring kisses and attraction. She looked at my mother, neither seemed to be genuinely amused or entertained. Why don't you two dolls get your little butts on the couch? Pamela said with a motherly commanding tone. We need to talk. Mama added. Zoe and I walked together, past our mothers, into the living room. We both knew that this was not going to be fun, not at all. I had hoped I'd be allowed to change before getting into this, but it looked like I wasn't being given the chance. At least, I hoped, we'd get to the bottom of this whole clothing problem and I'd get out of these girls' things and back into the clothing I belonged in. We sat on the couch and looked at each other briefly. Zoe and I decided we were too close and slid a little ways apart. I had to adjust the skirt of my short dress as it twisted and cinched up somewhat. It was embarrassing and humiliating to have to sit here in this thing on the huge couch. I kicked my feet as I squirmed about, feeling the panties slide and ride and twist up in weird places. I couldn't adjust them now, it would have to wait until I could get up. Zoe smiled apologetically at me, seeing my awkward expression, and shot me a knowing glancing nod. I bet she knew this discomfort all too well, having been made to attend all sorts of pageants and shows earlier in her childhood. Still, I couldn't believe she'd done this to me. I would have given everything to give her a piece of my mind, and perhaps would have started to say something had our mothers not just walked in as I settled down. Now, ladies, Mama started, and I do say ladies after overhearing your conversation and exchange in the kitchen, where do you begin to explain this? Mama motioned her hands at me. And Zoe, darling, her mother added, you would be best to remember that I do not take lightly a young lady lying to anyone, especially her mother. She appeared done, but turned her head my way a second later. And that goes for you too, Martin. You may not be my daughter, or even mine, but I feel pretty sure that your mother will be just as hard on you if you're dishonest. Every bit as much, Mama added. So who talks first? She asked, watching as Zoe and I cast each other unsure looks. Martin sat there occasionally kicking his feet back and forth, unaware of how much like a little girl it made him appear to be. For the past 20 minutes he'd been sitting there on Zoe's couch, not more than 3 feet from the girl who'd put him in this very girlish outfit. During those 2 hours he and Zoe had explained everything to their mothers. When Martin had left his house with his mother, only to run into his best friend Randy literally as he opened the door to depart the house, who then walked with them. If being seen in a cutesy petticoat dress wasn't embarrassing enough, he had been walked here by his mother, adding a whole new degree of humiliation to the event. Adding his best friend to the mix just served to remind Martin that he would never be allowed to forget this torturous day. He had no idea how many people had seen them walking down the sidewalk, and he prayed none had seen him practically skipping in this ridiculously flirty dress as he tried to keep pace with Randy near the end of his trip to Zoe's house. He actually had to cling to Randy's arm a few times to keep from falling, and Martin was sure his mother behind them was amused and keenly aware that his panties were being exposed even if they weren't. Martin had convinced himself every step made the dress fly up enough to narrowly miss showing them off. A stumble or skipping step had to be showing them off in earnest. He hated the vulnerability that the little dress was on him. At the walkway to the house, Randy had listened to his friend's desperate pleas to not accompany him any further. For all the stories he told Mrs. Stevens, Randy proved himself a good friend to Martin. He opted to not go on and give his friend what modicum of dignity he could, and he went on home, wishing Martin the best in a sarcastically typical jest. The two kids were caught kissing in the kitchen. Zoe and Martin were pressed tight to one another and had just started to kiss. In truth, it was a second kiss, this time initiated by Martin in response to Zoe's peck on the cheek, when their mothers walked in on them. This prompted a chiding and a mild scolding to them both, and found the two side by side on the couch as the mothers were intent to get to the bottom of this entire ordeal. Martin had told his mother he was an innocent victim of Zoe's twisted imagination. That he had innocently followed her upstairs because she was teasing him by being a flirt, and then had drugged him. Somehow during his drugged-out state he had been stripped and dressed in these little girls' clothing, panties and all, and brought home. But Martin had as much trouble as his mother had believing that Zoe could have done that all alone, and it seemed impossible that she could do half of what she did in his room without an army of help. Those were things that Martin claimed to have no answer for. Most of the questions had been targeted at Zoe, particularly around her behavior flirtatiously enticing Martin upstairs and into her room. But things didn't add up that it was entirely her fault. Suddenly things were about to get a lot more uncomfortable for Martin. So let me get this straight, Martin's mother, Karen, stared at her son sternly. You went all googly-eyed up the stairs after little Zoe when you knew she was wearing a dress that was too short for her? He nodded, blushing deeply that his mother knew why he had followed her so intently. And you expect us to believe you are all innocent? Mama! Martin shrieked. Out of the corner of his eye he couldn't help but notice Zoe cross her legs self-consciously and blush. I wasn't. She just made it too easy to be nosy. That is no excuse. Zoe's mother, Pamela, snapped. Before either Martin or his mother could reply, she turned to Zoe, and you, young lady, have been told to wear shorts, leggings, or pants under that dress or not to wear it ever again. Her tone was forceful and reeked of a scolding and punishment yet to come. Mommy. Zoe meekly pleaded. Cut the kitty crap, Zoe. Pamela stopped her daughter's tone and weak attempt at making herself seem younger and innocent. Mom. Zoe sounded more like a teenager this time. I didn't do anything wrong. He was the one being all perverted. You were advertising and asking him to be. She replied. As far as I am concerned, you are just as much the pervert as he is. Zoe's face sunk, realizing she wasn't going to pass off her behavior onto Martin's poor manners. Nevertheless, Karen looked at Pamela, then to her son. I don't ever want to hear of you looking up a girl's dress unless it's your wife's dress and she's holding it up for you. Else, I'll make sure you have to learn firsthand how demeaning that is. Do you understand me? Mama. I already know how mean it is. Martin flipped his hands upward at the edge of his dress's skirts, causing them to fly up at the sides of his legs. The many layers of the petticoat kept him from flashing his panties to the room, but he didn't realize this, and his hand jerked down the flying dress as fast as they caused it to fly. His face deepened in a pinkish-red color from the embarrassment the belief that he'd just shown his panties off brought him. No, I mean you'll learn it firsthand from someone mean that will tease you about it. Karen said firmly, her tone getting even more so after her son's challenge of her admonishment. Now, do you understand me? Yes, Mama. Martin said, his head dipping towards the floor so that his downcast stare was vacantly at his girlish shoes. Good. She said, not sounding very forgiving. No, go on, and look at me when I am talking to you. You know better than that. Her tone softened a little as to not sound like a scolding, but it was still very authoritative and clearly reinforced that she was in charge and not him. Pamela had walked out while this back and forth between Karen and her son was going on, and was just coming in with the cookies the two kids were supposed to have gotten earlier. As the scent of the fresh cookies caught Karen's nose, it also caught her memory. Martin had always been a good kid and such tricks were rarely needed, but Karen was adept at them when they were. She had taken 2 years of pre-med in college aiming at psychiatric care before she'd met Robert and the two had fallen in love. If not for a premature pregnancy, following some unwise celebration at a party, she likely would have finished school. Both of them had dropped out of school to gain meaningful and decent-paying employment to care for their suddenly starting family. Karen never did get back to school. After the wedding, Lynn was born in just 8 short months. 4 years later, Martin was born. Just 3 years ago, Karen had thought about going back to school, now that Lynn was old enough to watch Martin for a few hours after school. Robert had made major inroads with his company and even without a degree was bringing home very good money for the area, and he supported her fully. But like many things, there was to be a snag in their plans. In Karen's case, it wasn't a snag but a disaster. She had been attending the pre-semester catch-up classes, something designed by the local college to help adults returning to school to get back into the groove and the pace of things on a college campus, for only 2 weeks when disaster struck. Karen had just sat down in her first class of the afternoon when her beeper went off. Her instructors knew she had children, like many parents in the classroom, and were generally forgiving of such things so long as they weren't habit, and Karen was allowed to leave the class for a moment to make sure everything was okay. She called home and a frantic Martin answered. Something was dreadfully wrong. While his words were choppy with fear and tears, she could make out something about an accident and she could hear sirens in the background. By the time Karen arrived at the house, the ambulance crew had already loaded Lynn into the back of their truck. Identifying herself as the teenager's mother, they quickly told her what they think had happened and that Martin was with the neighbor so she could ride with her daughter. Karen did, and it broke her heart. Lynn never made it to the hospital. A gas leak in the kitchen stove caused a sudden fireball-like effect when Lynn had opened the oven. She was making the cookies Karen had promised Martin she'd do with him that previous weekend, before she knew of all the homework she'd have to do. She never was able to get to it. She didn't even finish the homework. Karen never could fully forgive herself for that, and dropped the idea of going to school. She and Martin both went through a year of therapy, a precautionary measure to keep either of them from having any sort of mental issues from the accident. It was, after all, an accident and nothing anyone could have done would have changed things. Karen still kept up with her interests in psychiatry and psychology, but she never felt like returning to school. After the accident and having to brush off her son and not holding to her word to make the cookies with him, which she felt led to it in some way, she couldn't bear to let school or career stuff get in the way of family again. Karen shook her head. Martin had just asked her something but she'd missed it. She was only vaguely aware of a question being directed at her. "Mama?" he repeated. "Are you okay?" "Yes, sweetheart," she said after a second. "I'm sorry, what did you ask me?" "I asked if you wanted a cookie," Martin said, smiling, eating one himself already. "Karen, would you mind if we send the kids upstairs for a moment?" Pamela asked her friend, showing some concern over her sudden spacing out. "We could let poor Marty get out of that frilly dress and into something less," she paused, looking for a certain word, vulnerable. She came up with, but her face said that wasn't the word she'd wanted. "Yes, that'd be fine," Karen said after a second. "I think we should talk about these two anyway." She sounded more like herself, a bit firmer tone, as she eyed the kids off the couch. "Zoe, darling," Pamela started, "take Marty upstairs and find something less formal and frilly to wear, will you?" "Yes, Mama," Zoe answered dutifully. "And, Zoe, Marty," Pamela added as the kids got to the stairs, "behave yourselves this time, "Yes, ma'am." The two children replied in unison, followed by a giggle a second later at the sudden spontaneous unity of their reply. Once the kids were heard moving around upstairs, the two adults moved into the study, Pamela shutting the door behind them. The room was not as big as the study at Karen's house, but it was not set up as an office or library like hers was either. It seemed roomier and more functional for a family to use together. Karen decided she'd liked it long ago, but really couldn't bring herself to get rid of the office-like confines of what would have been her home office for her practice. "Karen, what happened out there?" Pamela asked, sitting down on the small couch in the room. "Nothing, Pam," Karen replied, sitting herself down on the same couch at the other end. There wasn't much room between them, and the coziness that usually created felt confining to Karen suddenly. "Just something I'd almost forgotten." "Karen." Pamela said her name like a soft, sorrowful scolding. "You're never going to forget what happened. You wouldn't want to, but don't let it bring you down now." "I know, I am trying to be strong and logical about it," Karen said, her voice breaking a little bit. "But it's hard this time of year." "I know, dear." Pamela slid closer so that she was right beside her friend and put her arm around her in a gentle hug. "But it's not a bad thing to remember. You just have to remember the good things, not the bad." "I know, it's just hard. It's only been 3 years." Karen started crying, leaning her head on Pamela's shoulder. "I know, but think about Lynn making the cheerleading team, varsity as a freshman. She was so happy, and you and Robert were so proud of her." Pamela started. "And what about the funny things she did, her comedy and jokes? Or how about when she had Martin being her magician's aide and had him wearing the little ball gown and leotards?" Her voice trailed off. "Oh my God!" Karen shot right up off Pamela's shoulder so fast that they almost knocked heads. "Do you think that is what started this with him?" "It couldn't, could it?" Pamela asked. "Why not?" Karen said. "He was young and would do anything to please his sister and us. And once after Lynn died, I caught him wearing one of her skirts. In fact, he threw a fit when we were cleaning out her closet and insisted that he get her pants and t-shirts because anyone could wear those, not just girls. He just wanted something to remember her with." Pamela said. "That's not unusual, and besides, he's right. Nothing you gave him was expressly girls anyway." "No, but he kept her show stuff, even her cheerleading uniform. He has them all in his closet in a special section with her picture and everything." "So what?" Pamela didn't get how that could make him and Zoe do what they'd done. "Sounds more like he put a private remembrance shrine together in the back of his closet. That's not unhealthy. Despite the age difference, Lynn was very good to him and they were very close." "Yeah, I suppose so," Karen said. "I guess I am just grasping at straws trying to figure this out." "Well, why don't we get you cleaned up and go upstairs and talk to the kids some more?" Pamela advised. "We've not really gotten too much into this with them, have we?" "Not nearly enough," Karen agreed. "Thanks, Pam. That's what friends are for," she replied. "I've got some of my makeup in the bathroom down here if you want to freshen yours up." "Thanks." Karen smiled at her friend as she stood up and headed to the downstairs bathroom. It had a door to the living room and to the study. Karen locked them both once inside. A few minutes later, Karen came out looking much more like she did when she'd arrived. "Let's go up quietly and see what they're up to," Pamela said. "Sounds good to me," Karen whispered in agreement. Meanwhile, upstairs. "Does your mom do that often?" Zoe asked as she got to her closet. "Do what?" Martin had just sat down on the foot of Zoe's bed. "Space out like that." Zoe looked over her shoulder at Martin, grinning. I do that too, but it's because of my narcolepsy. Yeah, you told me about that. After that day in our pool when you just flop off the diving board. Martin replied. And I don't think Mama does it often. I don't remember seeing her do that much at all. How about this? Zoe turned on her heels, letting an overall dress similar to hers fly out in front of her and settle down before she pushed her arms out to show it to Martin. Another dress? Martin whined. Zoe, your mom said nothing too girly. No, she said nothing too frilly and less formal. Zoe corrected him. And this is not frilly or formal. But it's a dress. He whined. It looks like it's every bit as short as this one. Just like yours. It is. She admitted, shrugging her shoulders. But I can give you some tights or stretch pants to wear with it so your legs won't be showing like with that one, or like mine are. She stuck her right leg out, turning it side to side a little as if showing it off. Is that all you've got in that closet, a ton of sissy dresses? Martin stood up, this time using his hands not to get up but to smooth his skirts out and to preserve his modesty, in a very ladylike manner. Good job. Zoe said, watching her friend standing up. You got the hang of that quickly. Hang of what? He asked, walking over to her, his hands at his sides, not aware he had them out as if they were helping him balance. That too. She giggled. She saw the sore look on his face and knew to explain. How you got up, silly. And now how you're walking. She put her hands to her side, letting the dress hang almost to the floor in one hand, mimicking his hand positions and tossing her hips a little. He didn't do that much, but the heeled shoes made a little more sway than he'd normally have in his step. Shut up. He pleaded. I am not a stupid sissy girl. Zoe slapped him. Out of nowhere her hand flew up and connected with his cheek. The look of surprise on both their faces shocked them both. Oh my God, I am so sorry. Zoe spit out as if the sentence was a single word. I don't know what came over me. I guess you just said those mean things about yourself, and me, and I. Martin stood there, stunned, one hand on his face. The stinging was already going away. Thankfully Zoe wasn't a very strong girl, but the shock that she'd actually slapped him sunk in deeply. He felt the sting in his pride and ego still bitterly fresh and painful. I'm sorry, Zoe. He barely formed the words. I didn't mean to. A second later he blinked, his eyes were wet. He scolded himself inside, but it didn't do any good. A few seconds later the forming tears gained enough moisture to run from his eyes and down his cheeks. Marty! Zoe said, ashamed of herself. I'm sorry, sweetie. She grabbed a tissue and wiped the tears off his cheeks. Please don't cry. Will you forgive me? It's okay. I am okay. He stepped back to get away from her, but she stepped with him and kept dabbing at his eyes with the tissue. Here, sit down. I'll get you something else to wear, she said, walking him to the bed and sitting him on the foot of it again. She walked into her closet and he could hear her shuffling things around. She would only be gone a few moments, he knew, but he had a plan. When Zoe finally came out of the closet she was stunned at what she saw. Martin had somehow managed to get out of the dress he'd been wearing and was already pulling the overall dress over his head. She quickly jumped back into the closet before his face came out of the dress, hoping she wasn't seen. I found something, she said, making false footsteps as if she was coming up to her position. Okay, Martin dryly said. How about? She stepped out of the closet holding a pair of soft blue denim capris and a white with baby blue trim t-shirt. Oh my! She giggled as if it was a total surprise. In a way it was just a delayed reaction to her seeing it. "What do you think?" Martin said, spinning on the heels of his still more formal shoes. The dress had a little more movement in the skirt than Zoe's, having a pleated skirt section opposed to straight all the way down, but it didn't reveal more than the uppermost thigh. Bending over or sitting may be more exposing, he thought, but the movement of it was far more restricted than of the dress he just stripped out of. "You look adorable," she said, her eyes beaming. "I never thought that burgundy would be your color." She commented about the dark red color of the material. "You'll need a shirt to wear under that bib part though," she commented, turning back to her closet. "And do you want pink stretch pants or white tights?" Pink or tights? He hadn't thought about that. "Are the tights thick or are they the see-through types?" "These." She tossed him a pair from her dress right next to the closet. Putting his hand into one of the legs, he could tell it'd be semi-transparent and that the stitching had flowers and shimmery threads in them. "I'll go with the pink pants then," he said, tossing the tights back when she turned around. She tossed the pants, which looked way too small when he'd caught them, in return. "Put those on while I get you a shirt," she said, walking back into the closet. "Oh, and take off those knee-highs and those shoes first." She giggled at the idea of anyone not taking the shoes off. "Duh," Martin said, taking off the socks. He'd already removed the shoes. The pants had a strap that went under his foot and kept the pants pulled down. As he pulled them up, he was amazed at how much they stretched and that they made it to his waist easily. They likely could go much higher before getting to the point where they'd start to work their way down. He walked and squatted and made some kicking motions to test the fit, and they never seemed to move. It was like they were on like skin to his legs. "Fit pretty good, eh?" Zoe said from behind him. "Here, this shirt should match the pants and dress nicely." She handed him a small pink nearly sleeveless shirt with burgundy trim. The trim was shiny as if it were silk, but it wasn't too frilly or formal looking, as she'd been instructed. As Martin put it on, he noticed the burgundy writing, a cursive font of some sort, that read "spoiled" on the chest. It wouldn't be readable with the bib of the dress, and it wasn't as bad as princess or anything like that, so he didn't mind too much. "Got something for my feet?" Martin asked, lifting a foot and wiggling his toes. "Sure, but do you want me to show you how I do my nails?" Zoe asked, playfully. "What?" He was surprised. "Wouldn't that be formal or something like frilly?" "No, besides once they dry you put socks on and no one will see them," she said confidently. I don't know." "Please." She made a mock begging pose, clasping her hands and bending down beneath his head, cocking hers to the side slightly. Her tone is what really got to Martin though. "Oh, all right," he conceded. "But nothing too flashy. We've got to explain all this to our mothers already, remember?" "What's to explain?" Zoe asked, plainly, as she sat down on the floor in front of Martin. "Here, sit down with your legs out for me." She patted the floor and he sat as she requested. "You ever have your nails painted before?" "No," Martin said. "Why?" "Just curious," Zoe replied, with a matter-of-fact twist. "I guess I just don't think of that kind of stuff," Martin said, realizing Zoe was wanting more explanation by her facial expression. "You know, makeup and that sort of stuff." Zoe nodded. "Well, most boys don't think of those things until they see us girls using them." "I guess." "Marty," Zoe paused, looking him in the eyes, "can I ask you something?" "Sure, anything," Martin replied. "Why?" "Why what? Why do you like this?" She motioned her arms over her dress. You look cute in that dress. That's why. He replied. You moron. Zoe giggled and playfully scolded him at the same time. I meant, why do you like wearing these things? You said you thought I was cute in them. He answered her as plainly as he'd done all along. You mean you're doing this for me? Zoe asked. Or do you mean you're doing it to impress or please me? Neither. Martin said. You said I looked cuter in dresses than pants and you found it a real turn-on. Zoe nodded, but Martin didn't pause long enough to let her speak. And I like the way that makes me feel. That someone thinks I look good and it does things like that to them. That's why. Oh. Zoe said, sounding a little disappointed. I see. Zoe, why did you want me to dress up like you so much anyway? Martin decided that he'd get some answers too. Well, I saw how much fun you and Randy had at his sister's party and I guess I thought I kinda liked having someone that would do anything with me. She said after a long pause. Sort of like a little sister. But I am older than you are. Martin said. Marty, you may be older as a boy, but I've got lots more time in skirts and dresses than you do. As a girl, you're practically an infant. An infant? Martin said, shocked. He had the sudden vision of himself in a baby-like dress and with plush noisy diapers and pacifiers stuck in his mouth. He jerked back, partly involuntary and partly afraid of what that vision meant, as if he were protecting himself by pulling away. Sit still. Zoe chided, gripping his left ankle with an amazing show of reflexes, gripping it tightly but gentle enough that her longer fingernails didn't pinch into his skin. I said practically. Being a boy for 13 years is worth something after all. It's not like childhood is that much different for boys and girls. Yeah, we get gypped when it comes to things like football and baseball. We get to be the pretty mini-skirted cheerleaders for our gross icky super sports hero boys, but you don't get the cute innocent thing at all. So I'd say that has to be worth at least half your years as a girl. Half my years? Martin said, putting his other leg back where Zoe had had it. You mean you think of me as a 6-year-old when you see me dressed like this? No, silly. Zoe said. I wouldn't find a 6-year-old cute and a total hunk of hotness. And you do me? Martin asked. At least when I am dressed up like a little girl and am basically being your little sister? It's not like that, I don't mean it literally. Zoe said. Well, except for the total turn-on thing. Because you are totally eye candy, I can't resist right now. Uh-huh. Martin clearly wasn't getting it. But then, he never felt that he understood Zoe all that much growing up anyway. Still, he would have to admit that in recent months, as she was starting to hit puberty a little earlier than most girls did, that he found her very attractive as well. But like most boys his age, still in between of childhood and true teenaged adolescence, girls were a curiosity and not a time-intensive obsession, but Zoe was quickly moving up the list of important things to keep his eyes on. Besides, you seem to like it so much. You never said a thing about changing your room around. Zoe said. She started to blow on his feet, causing him to move them slightly as the gentle action tickled across them. Wait, I don't remember that. Martin said. I don't remember anything. You liar. Zoe said, not angry but out of shock. You said you were okay and that everything was fine. You drugged me. Martin said, starting to sound a little bit accusatory. I told you that was an accident. You swore to me that it wasn't bothering you. Zoe said quite emphatically. When? A little after. She said, almost in tears now. When you asked me to call Kristen and Jen to help us with your room. I said that? Martin's accusatory tone had faded entirely. Yes. Zoe crawled over to him, recognizing all the way that his eyes moved between her face and chest and her legs the entire time she moved. She sat right next to him and wrapped her arms around him. Marty, I wouldn't have done that if I thought the medication was affecting you like that. Zoe, I thought I passed out. You got sleepy and said you'd be okay to get to your room and change. Zoe said, apologetically and crying softly. She laid her head on Martin's shoulder. I knew I should have stayed with you. It's okay, Zoe. Martin said, bending an arm at the elbow so that he could put his hand on the side of her head. I didn't know what had happened and was confused. I was in the study looking over myself. I just found out I was in panties and all when Mama and Daddy walked in on me. Oh my God! Zoe sounded shocked. She let go of Martin and sat up normal, still right at his side. Now I understand why your mother walked you over here like that. Yeah, to get to the bottom of this. I told her that I didn't know about anything of this. Martin said. So you really don't remember asking me to help you redo your room and closet? Zoe asked. No, nothing. Martin said. Wait. Zoe paused. You got all dressed up in that princess get-up before I got the Kool-Aid. Yeah, so? Don't you remember agreeing to play dress-up? Zoe asked. Yes. And do you remember agreeing to play that silly old princess game we used to play when we were little and were babysat together? Yes, so what? Then why don't you remember not wanting to change back into your clothes until after I put makeup on you? Zoe said, smiling, knowing she just caught him. I do. Martin said. But you said, Zoe started. Oh my God! Martin cut Zoe off. I forgot all about that. I did say that. He covered his mouth with his hands. Zoe! What? I told you I wanted to know what it was like to be a girl. Yes, you did. She said. And I told you I couldn't help you with that, but I could finish the look with the makeup to match your pretty princess costume. Yeah, and you did that. Martin agreed. But what was with all that flirty stuff afterwards? Zoe blushed deeply. I guess it was then that I realized that I liked you and that I found that so attractive. Hearing that, Martin blushed. Wow. Yeah. Zoe said, barely audible. The two sat in silence, just looking at each other a moment. Quietly outside, their mothers stared at each other with very similar expressions. For a short while they had been listening in. Long enough to hear most of the revelations their two children had revealed to each other, and to them as well. It didn't seem right to barge on in at the moment, yet they both knew they couldn't walk away either. They whispered in the most quiet whisper they could manage, trying to figure out what to do. Finally, they decided to knock on the door and try to get in there, to get the rest of the story they'd missed. A few minutes of silence passed. Zoe and Martin sat there looking at each other in awe and wonder. Finally, Zoe got up and got Martin some pink and white semi-sparkly socks that matched pretty good to his stretch pants. She also gave him some flat canvas tennis shoes, the typical girl's casual everyday shoe. They both knew it had been more than long enough for them to have found something for Martin to wear. In fact, they were certain they'd be in for a scolding when they got back downstairs to find their chatting mothers forgetful of how long they had been gone suddenly were reminded of the matter. Just as the kids made it to the door, so did their mothers. In one innocent and common action, Zoe opened her bedroom door. At the same time, Martin's mother went to begin knocking on that same door. As the door opened and two mothers appeared out of nowhere, the two kids screamed in shock. Their mothers, one expecting a door and finding none to greet her hand, were likewise surprised as the barrier that prevented their discovery was suddenly pulled wide open and screamed in shock. A few minutes later, after parties on both sides of the mutual scare got their wits back about them, they met at the door again, this time with much less confusion and chaos. Only the briefest of questions and answers were exchanged before all four headed back downstairs, to fresh cookies no longer out of the oven warm and tea that was no longer hot. But there were, at least, answers even if they only were to bring more questions. "So you did lie to me?" Karen asked her son. She'd overheard his recollection that he indeed did ask to be shown what it was like being a girl. He'd expressly told her he hadn't wanted to know and that his being dressed up in girls' clothing was not a form of experimentation. "I forgot, Mama," Martin pleaded his case to his mother. "I didn't remember because of Zoe's medication in my Kool-Aid." "And just how did you accidentally give Marty the wrong glass, Zoe?" Pamela asked her daughter. "I don't know. I thought I put it on the left." She contorted her face as she tried to visualize what she was doing at the time she'd poured the Kool-Aid. "Since I am left-handed, I thought it'd be easy to remember," she recalled. "Apparently it wasn't," Pamela replied, flatly. "I almost got to the stairs when the phone rang." Zoe continued seemingly without notice to her mother's sarcasm. "And I set the tray down on the coffee table and got the phone. I was on a few minutes trying to shut a telemarketer up. I eventually hung up on him." "Zoe! That is not polite behavior for a young lady." Her mother chided her, interrupting to do so. "I'm sorry, Mama, but he wouldn't take no for an answer when I told him you and Daddy were both out. He kept insisting I get an adult and kept trying to tell me about the great timeshare deal he had to offer. I got mad." "I'm sorry." Zoe felt she had to defend herself. The telemarketer really was more than a nuisance. He had been downright rude and all but blatantly accused her of lying to him about being home alone. Zoe, feeling better about the hang-up, decided to continue her story. "After I hung up, I came back to the table, and..." "Oh my God!" she gasped. "What?" Karen asked. "I put the tray down from that side of the table." She pointed to the front door. "I picked it up coming from this way." She motioned towards the family room and kitchen area where the phone was. "I totally forgot that left isn't left on the other side of the room. I basically turned the tray around and didn't even realize it." Her eyes got wide and her face sullen. "I'm sorry, again, Marty." "Zoe, I already told you I forgive you, so quit apologizing," Martin said. "Besides, I wasn't hurt. You're going to be when your father finds out you were dressed like a little girl before you were drugged," his mother said. "Speaking of your father, I'd better call home and see if he is there." "Mama, please don't tell him about me," Martin begged. "Hush," his mother scolded him. "What I tell your father is between me and him. You don't make those decisions, and he will find out eventually anyway. But don't worry, it's not the kind of thing I plan on telling him over the phone. Besides, you've not given me a straight answer for all this as it is, so what would I tell him? Other than that you're in a different dress now?" The stern look she gave him was more than enough to keep him quiet. Karen walked into the other room and got the phone. Her muffled voice was low and the other couldn't hear what she was saying. Her tone sounded serious at times, almost grim at others, but ended on a lighter, almost cheery, note. However, her facial expression deflated any growing hopes Martin had for a good resolution to the conversation. "Well, was he mad?" Martin managed to say after a few moments, just after his mother had sat down. "Yes and no," she said. "Before you worry about your father, why don't you start at the beginning, since you remember it now?" She had a sarcastic bite to the end of her statement that made Martin feel like she believed he'd lied to her earlier. Somehow he'd have to earn her trust back so that she would understand that he hadn't. I did say I wondered what it was like to be a girl. Zoe offered to show me some of it by teaching me about girls' clothes. Martin said, starting slowly as if he had to fight his tongue to make the words. And I went along with everything she said. It was the makeup that did it though. I saw my face the first time and almost didn't recognize myself. Makeup? Pamela asked, looking at Zoe. You didn't get into mine, did you, young lady? Just a little bit, Zoe sheepishly replied. Zoe! Her mother said sternly. You know you're not allowed in my things. Don't think that Marty will be the only one punished for this whole fiasco. Yes, ma'am, Zoe meekly replied. So you wanted to know what it felt like to be a girl, eh? Karen said, gently prodding her son's face upward by pushing on the bottom of his chin. Mama? He barely got the word out. Her tone told him something was about to go very bad for him. Don't give me that innocent little girl routine, Karen said sharply. You're going to get that chance later, for now you can play the apologetic little girl. Karen? Pamela thought she knew where this was going but wanted to be sure. Are you sure you want to do it this way? They are, she replied, pointing at their children. And, besides, how better to teach these two a lesson if they can't get out of what they started whenever they want? She turned her attention to Martin. You, young lady, she emphasized lady with a strong sarcastic twist that made Martin sure he knew that he was who she was talking to, will be a little girl, just like you wanted to be, from sunup to sunup. You mean sunup to sundown, don't you? Zoe asked, not getting the entire day meaning Karen was trying to convey. Martin cringed out of the corner of her eye and she regretted interjecting herself into the dishing out of punishment immediately. Zoe Renee! Pamela snapped. You do not interrupt adults when they are speaking. Is that understood? Yes, ma'am, she dropped her head in pure reflexive motion as she took her scolding. I'm sorry, Mrs. Stevens. Apology accepted, dear. Karen said to Zoe before returning to her son. Marty, yes Marty, you will be a good little girl or else I will extend your punishment. As it is, you're going to have it rough tonight anyway, so you'd best behave and not make this linger. You got that? Yes, Mama, Martin said. Mama? What? How long do I have to do this? He asked. Well, that depends on what you and Zoe and her friends did in your room. Karen looked at Zoe. You replaced everything of his boy's clothing? Yes, ma'am, Zoe said. Zoe! Her mother couldn't believe she'd done that. Somehow it seemed so very wrong and ill-behaved to even consider doing something like that. What did you do with his clothes? Jen and Kristen took them to their houses, Zoe said after a slight delay. They both have basement bedrooms and can stash things easily. Really? I think that they may have lessees doing that after tonight, Pamela said. Mama, please don't tell their mothers. Zoe begged. I asked them to do it. Let me call them and get the stuff back. It's all right, Pam, Karen said. Let's call their mothers, but not to tell them of a conspiracy, at least not so negatively. There is a good side to Marty's things being inaccessible. She can't cheat, she said the word she with the same twist she'd used on Lady earlier. Zoe, how much clothing did you put into Marty's room? Karen asked. Tons. She motioned with her arms and widened her eyes, momentarily forgetting that this was not a happy moment. We put lots of everything in there. It's as if a little girl had been living there for years, she said gleefully. It took less than 2 seconds for her to realize her tone and recognize the pained expression on Martin's face. "Thanks," Martin said. "You should thank her," Karen said. "You'll be a girl for 2 days for every day I could fully clothe you without doing laundry. So if there are enough clothes in there to dress you from inside out, head to toe, as a girl for 10 days you'll be a girl for 20. Get it?" "Yes, Mama," Martin said. "Wow, you're gonna be a girl like forever," Zoe said softly to Martin. "We put like tons of things in your dresser." "Forever?" Karen said. Zoe's eyes went wide, aware that her soft whisper wasn't so low that their parents couldn't hear it. "Not literally, but there are lots of underwear and tights and things," Zoe explained. "I'd say 2 or 3 weeks worth." She looked upward as if counting something floating over her head. 3 weeks? Martin said, shocked. "I can't be a girl that long." "You won't be," Pamela said. For a moment the boy looked suddenly calmed, but that bubble of relief was about to burst. "You'll be a girl for 6 weeks, remember 2 for 1? She smiled, as widely as Karen was, when Martin slumped back onto the couch like his legs just quit working. 6 weeks, he whispered in shock. "Mama, I'll miss the tryouts for football." "Well, you should have thought about that before you did this," Karen replied. "Besides, that is 5 weeks away." Zoe could be overestimating. "You'd better be," Martin said to her. "I don't know," Zoe said. "I don't think any of us 4 ever counted." 4? Karen asked. "Yes, Jen and Kristen, Martin and I," Zoe answered. "Marty helped?" Pamela asked, rhetorically. "Now, that's what I call irony." "It isn't funny," Martin said. "Your father doesn't think so either," Karen said. "But he is the one that came up with this punishment." "Dad knows," Martin exclaimed. "Daddy, Marty," Zoe corrected him. "Girls always call their fathers daddy." "Zoe!" Martin snapped at her. "Marty Iris Stevens." He snapped his head towards his mother as she ripped out his entire name. "You will not be a rude little girl, do you hear me? I didn't raise you to be so disrespectful. You best mind your manners or days will be added to your punishment." She paused. "Now, apologize to Zoe. She was trying to help you. You do well to listen to her advice too." "I'm sorry, Zoe. I didn't mean to yell at you like that," Martin said, looking directly at her. "It's okay, I think I understand." Zoe could see he wanted to cry. She couldn't help but feel sorry for him. This was obviously far more than anyone could have expected for this wind-up going. "The other thing you have to do," Karen started again, "is to go home and explain this to your father. But, you have to go back wearing the same thing you came over here in." "I have to face Daddy dressed in that really uncomfortable frilly dress?" Martin asked. "Yes, sweetheart." "Okay." "Zoe?" Martin looked at her, obviously asking for help. "Sure, I'll help you get changed. The dress has that tricky bow thing to tie in the back," she added the latter statement in explanation to their mothers, whether or not they needed any justification for Zoe to accompany Marty upstairs. "Go on," Pamela said. "We'll discuss your punishment later, Zoe." Her words chased the kids out of the room. "Well, this will be," Karen delayed, "interesting." She found something suitable for what she was thinking. "Did Robert really come up with that punishment?" Pamela asked. "Seems awfully out there for him to dream up." As homophobic and boy equals bronze, she mocked a brutish tone and depth of voice, for him to even suggest putting his son in panties and dresses. "Well, he did suggest it," Karen said, his face slowly showing a sly grin. After I all but gave him the idea and baited him into thinking it up. Crafty as always, Pamela said, laughing. We women need to be, eh? Karen jested. That we do. That we do. The two girls came downstairs nearly 15 minutes later. Marty's hair had been done up into 2 pigtails, and he was, once again, wearing the knee-high socks with the lace trim. His hair, normally straight and hanging to the upper mid-back, only reached to the shoulders as the pigtails came out from the head high on the crown and bounced about with every move he made. These are the same knee-highs Marty had on earlier, aren't they? Zoe asked. And I did her hair up in a cute style I like. Do you have any ribbons? Pamela asked. Yes, Mama, she answered dutifully. Please get some pink ones to match Marty's outfit, Karen added. Yes, ma'am. Zoe ran back upstairs. Mama, do I have to do this? Marty whined. Yes, and stop whining, she replied. Remember, be a good girl or else I add on more days that you have to be a girl. Yes, Mama, he said, sounding defeated. A few moments later Zoe reappeared with the thin ribbons, both cotton candy pink. She handed them to Karen, who tied them into bows at the top of the pigtails. She made sure to intertwine the long tails of the ribbons into the pigtails' tails. Well, that about does it, Karen said, stepping back and making Marty spin around for her to examine. I guess it's about time to get you home to talk to Daddy. Marty's expression was that a person expecting something bad. Do I have to? He asked, more pleading than asking. Yes, you do, Karen said to her son. And a little girl should be excited to see her daddy, especially such a daddy's girl that would advertise it with a shirt like yours. She poked Marty's chest gently, drawing his attention to the daddy's little princess printed on the front of the shirt. Marty groaned, remembering what it said, and guessing what his dad would say when he got home. Mama, Marty said, after a thoughtful pause. Let's just go home and get this over with. His face was downcast and he was sliding one foot meekly around, dragging the toe across the carpet carelessly. Okay, sweetheart, Karen said, putting an arm around Marty. Let's go home. Karen said their goodbyes and Pamela walked them to the door. If you need anything, she offered. Karen nodded in understanding. Marty, Zoe meekly spoke up. Marty turned and looked back at her. Call me. I will, Marty softly replied, before turning back to the world outside, dreading the conversation to come when he got home. I will, Zoe. Thank you for everything. You're welcome, Zoe said, surprised that Marty had thanked her. If you need anything, and I mean anything, literally. Okay, Marty said, just loud enough for Zoe to hear, without turning around. Marty, darling, Karen said, as the two made the corner, I will be right there beside you the entire time you're talking with your father. At least until I know you two will be okay alone. It will be okay. I promise, she grabbed his hand, taking his arm under hers.